That God raised Jesus from the dead raises some questions, doesn't it? Because typically, dead people stay dead. So in what universe is it expected that a dead person will come back to life, just to put it bluntly? What does it mean that Jesus, who was crucified, came back to life and shaped a community of followers who would become the church? What happened that would cause a motley crew of cowardly disciples to become courageous leaders of an emerging spiritual movement? As we've heard in today's gospel reading, it was an unlikely beginning. On Easter Sunday night, the disciples take shelter in a safe house where they double-locked the doors, closed the curtains, and turned out all of the lights so nobody would know they were inside. They were scared as could be and worried that they would be busted for befriending the former dead man. They didn't know what to do. So they just sat there in the dark, asking Mary if she was sure that the man she saw in the garden was really Jesus. What they all didn't know was that Jesus was standing on the other side of the deadbolt door, listening to the guys give Mary the third degree, and then, like a thief in the night, he picks the lock on his friend's fear and trembling. He crashes their Sunday night GPS group, and the first thing he says, standing in the living room, is, "Peace be with you." And with that, he begins to shape this crowd of cowards into a team of dreamers and a band of believers. Of all the times to skip out on their Sunday night small group, Thomas is nowhere to be found. Where is the guy? Did he go for a walk? Was he visiting family? Was he out getting groceries? What was going on there? By the time he gets back, Jesus has already come and gone, and Thomas doubts that Jesus had been there at all. The disciples said, "Thomas, we have seen the Lord," and Thomas isn't buying it. Of course, Thomas' reputation precedes him in the history of the church, doesn't it? To me, Thomas has this doubt spasm in the Gospel of John, and suddenly it becomes all he's known for. I wonder if Thomas might say of himself, it's not that I doubt. I just don't believe anything anyone tells me. See. To be clear, Thomas was not a man who had trouble with trust and commitment. Thomas raised his voice the loudest when Jesus insisted on going up to Jerusalem to tend to Lazarus. Remember that earlier in the Gospel of John? While the rest of the disciples were coming up with a million different excuses for not going to help Lazarus, Thomas says, "Let us also go that we may die with him." But Thomas is not somebody who would blindly believe either. When Jesus sat around the Last Supper table and told his friends and disciples not to be afraid because they knew the way he was going, Thomas doesn't even raise his hand before he's raising the question, "Lord, we have no idea where you're going, and how are we supposed to know the way?" And this is where we get that great line from Jesus in John's Gospel, who answers Thomas' question and says, "I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the life." So before we jump to conclusions about Thomas, we have to remember this guy isn't the cold-hearted skeptic who has never known what it's like to be in the company of Jesus. Thomas and Jesus have a deep history together. Now, Thomas must have had all sorts of questions for the witnesses, to which they must have finally said, "I guess you had to be there." And Thomas has this doubt spasm again and says, "Unless I see the mark of the nails, I will not believe." I don't know about you, but I admire Thomas because he's a guy who's never shy about raising questions. He cares more about making sense of his struggles than he does about sounding spiritual or easily affirming what he's not ready to believe. He's an honest doubter, a faithful doubter. And when Jesus shows up a week later, notice Jesus does come back a week later, he walks through the same shut doors as the week before and says, "Shame on you, Thomas. Why didn't you believe in me when everyone else told you about me?" No. Jesus walks in and says, not shame on you, but shalom to you. Peace, my friend. If you're looking for where grace is in this story, well, there's a place. The fact that Jesus came back to the house while Thomas was there the next week is a moment of grace. And he came back with a message of grace that goes something like, relax, because there is nothing you can do to make me love you more, and there is nothing that you can do to make me love you less. I've noticed on Facebook this week several parents and teachers of children who posted an article from the popular blog Momastery. Get it? Not monastery, but Momastery. Just making sure. Anyway, the author of the blog, her name is Glennon Doyle Melton, and among her many jobs, this woman has an incredible personal story that I don't have time to tell you about this morning, but one of her many jobs is to talk to children about how wild and wonderful is their world, their God, and other people, she says, and how fiercely and forever and unconditionally loved those children are. And the story she told this time was of children waddling like geese up to the front of the sanctuary for children's time. So the story I'm about to tell you is mostly verbatim of what's on her blog, and you can go and read it later today. I'll post it on our Facebook page later this afternoon. But she tells of a little boy named Ryan. Ryan was a head taller than the other children, and his eyes were dark and deep, she says, like wells you can look into but never find the bottom of. Isn't that nice? I was immediately drawn to this little man, she says, with the big, deep, sad eyes, because I agree with Doctor Who. Sad is happy for deep people. I winked at Ryan. He grinned just a little. My friends Nancy and Susan started the lesson, and we sang and we danced, and then we quieted ourselves and went into our still, small place in our hearts where we can listen for God. Then halfway through our quiet minute, my big-eyed friend motioned to me in a way that said, "Can you come here? But can you not make a big deal about it?" So she says, I went over to Ryan, but I didn't make a big deal about it. I just casually sat down next to him and kept facing forward so he could take his time telling me whatever it was that he needed to tell me. Finally, he tapped me on the shoulder, and I leaned down close, and he looked around the big sanctuary, and he said, "Excuse me, is God coming?" Then Ryan looked around again like he was expecting God to show up. You know, like to show up here like Ronald shows up occasionally at McDonald's. And I just stared at this little man who had just asked me the question that every single human being who has ever looked around a fancy sanctuary or a busted up family or a hurting friendship or a shocking diagnosis or a messy world is thinking. Excuse me, is God coming? She said, I swallowed hard. And I said, Ryan, that is the best question I've ever heard. Just the best one. Listen, I don't know if you want me to, but I got to tell you, I think your class needs to hear your brilliant question. May I share it? My big-eyed friend's eyes got even bigger, and he tried to contain a proud little smile, and he nodded to me. And I stood up and announced the question that I had been asking my entire life too. Is God coming? And then it got really quiet. And I looked at my friend and tried to respond. I babbled, really. I said, I don't have an answer. No one does, really. But here's my hunch. I think God is already here. I don't think we wait for God to come as much as we bring God to each other. I think God is inside me and you, Ryan. It's like, you know how cookies have sugar in them, and that's what makes them delicious? We have God in us. And I think God sent us to be here for each other because God is inside of us. So God knows that if we show up, God is here too. God sends us to each other because we are all God's family, and sometimes family members send each other. You know how sometimes your daddy sends your mommy to pick you up, and sometimes your mommy sends your daddy? And all the little ones raised their hands and nodded, except for this little boy named Ryan. I stopped and looked right at him, and he said, "My daddy doesn't pick me up. My daddy's in heaven." And then I just went out on a big limb that appeared in front of me. Ryan, I don't know how you can know if God is here or not, but here's what happens to me when I notice that God is with me. My heart starts to feel bigger. It feels like it is swelling up. It feels like it's going to get so big that it might crawl up through my throat, like right now, next to you. My heart feels huge, like somebody pumped it full of air. I think this heart swelling is sometimes how God reminds me that God is with me. I think this is what Glennon calls a brutiful, meaning life's brutal and beautiful, and they're woven together so tightly that they can't be separated. This is a brutiful moment. And part of what Jesus means when we internalize his words, "Blessed are those who have not seen and yet they believe," the presence of Christ's Spirit, even in the absence of the bodily Jesus, is what we might call the phenomenon of the swelling heart. And in our post-Thomas experience of Jesus, the full force of this phenomenon has the power to break open our hearts too. For all of our doubts about God, about life, about ourselves, for those of us who see struggle as a sign of life, Thomas really becomes this sort of trusted friend, a soulmate even, a brutiful soul for us. And in Thomas we find someone who has a need to know, has a need to be certain, has a need to just feel and touch and see for himself. Maybe that's why some of you like him so much, because I like him so much, because we don't want to be gullible or naive, and neither did Thomas, It occurs to me that Thomas is a testament to people in churches like ours who relate faith not to people who don't have any questions. Saint of doubters and questioners. Thomas, the one who is not afraid to speak up and ask questions when nobody else wants to. And so today, you and I carry around all sorts of questions, doubts about faith, about ourselves, about our lives, do we not? Some of us are prone to do this more than others, but at what time or another has Thomas not gotten into all of us? Thomas gets into us if we've ever asked questions like, why do the innocent suffer? What does faith have to do with my job anyway? Why go to church? Is there life after death? When we hear of school shootings and car bombs and tragedies, we ask, where is God in all of this? And then even more personal questions. Why is our family having so much trouble? Why can't I believe as easily as others? What's my purpose in life? We're full of doubts about many things. I doubt it's going to rain today. I doubt the Cubs will win the World Series this year. Actually, I'm hoping they do. I doubt I'll ever be famous. I doubt I'll just get the perfect job I want. I doubt I'll ever find true love. I doubt my friends would like me if they really knew who I was. I doubt my parents will ever be smarter than I am. That's for the teenagers in the room, of course. It's okay to doubt. It's okay to ask questions. Human beings are natural-born questioners. Weren't you parents so proud when your child uttered her first words until the word why enters the vocabulary? If you've ever spent any time with a 4-year-old, you know that why leads on to why. And more questions come. Why do I have to brush my teeth? Why do I have to go to the bathroom? Where does it go when I flush? Where does the sun go at night? Why do dogs sniff everything? Why does popcorn pop? Questions are a natural part of learning about life, and they're a natural part of learning the Jesus way of life too. Our questions, no matter how many of them we have, can lead us to deeper understanding of ourselves, of God, of one another. Concerning ones who are prone to chronic doubting, I think there are people who have the doubt spasms, like Thomas. Then there are people who have chronic bouts of doubt. G.K. Chesterton offers interesting advice. He writes, "It is not the right method to tell the person to stop doubting. It is rather the right method to tell that person, go on doubting. Doubt a little more. Doubt a little more. Doubt every day newer and wilder things in the universe until at last, by some strange enlightenment, you might begin to doubt yourself and doubt your doubts." I think his advice to us is what Jesus already knew himself. Notice how he deals with patience and warmth and openness when he says to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it in my side. Do not doubt, but believe." You see, Jesus didn't engage Thomas in some head trip. Rarely are we argued into faith or belief. Most of the time we are charmed into it. We are welcomed into it. We are brought into beautiful moments through it. "Shalom, here I am." Jesus shows Thomas the scars from his wounds. Thomas said, "I've got to see the marks if I'm going to believe." And Jesus gives Thomas the benefit of the doubt and invites him to touch his wounds. In that holy, almost ghostly moment, his confession comes in a shocked whisper, "My Lord and my God." And I can't help but think that when Thomas sees the scars of Jesus, I wonder if it were his own wounds he really felt were being healed. The open wounds of unbelief that kept his heart closed to love after loss and new life beyond the death of the way things used to be. Because when our hearts are broken open by the risen Jesus, we see his scars that remind us of healing beyond our own wounds. And the beautiful experience of that is that we might still be confused, but we're not so confused about our confusion. We still have our anxieties and our fears, but we're not so afraid of them anymore. We still experience weakness, but we're not so weakened by our weaknesses. If, like Thomas, we want physical proof of the resurrection of Jesus, maybe the best answer we can give is, it is in the flesh and blood lives of those who come to follow his way in the world, with staggers and stutters. This ragtag group of worshipers and doubters is the church. It's you, it's me, it's us. At its best, bearing the scars of the one sent from God, breaking the bread, drinking the cup of Christ's presence. Because time, no matter how much we might believe it so or feel it to be true, time cannot make a relic of the resurrection as some cryptic meaning of the past locked away in the memory of duped disciples. Resurrection can only be doubted for so long until it somehow happens to Thomas and to you and to me and to Ryan. Jesus gives Thomas and us the benefit of the doubt. And Jesus gives us the benefit of the doubt too when he says to Thomas, "You have seen because you do believe, but from now on, blessed are the ones who have not seen and yet they believe." And finally, giving God the benefit of the doubt, is about trusting that there is no stone standing between us and Jesus, blocking the way to God. The truth of the Easter God is that the same Spirit who in the tomb of Jesus said, "Let there be life," is the same Spirit moving and speaking inside of you and inside of me, daring you to come out of whatever tomb it is that you find yourself living in. This week I learned from my almost 4-year-old little boy about silence. And I know that's ironic to learn about silence from a 4-year-old who's asking why all the time. He practices silence at his school, apparently. Who knew? And here's how it happens. All the kids get in a circle, and Aiden this week in his little voice says to me, "I put my hands on my lap, and I take a deep breath, and I close my eyes, and I make a beautiful silence." Ugh, man, talk about heart swelling. So in this moment, I invite you now to put your hands on your lap. Go ahead and do it. Take a deep breath. Close your eyes. Make a beautiful silence. And while you do, you may feel the presence of Jesus breaking the lock on your own fear, forgiving your failings, smiling over you while you confess your doubts about so many things. It's okay. And may you hear his words rising in your swelling heart. "Blessed are you who have not seen, and yet come to believe." Alleluia.